I have seen this exact same setup 3 times before, and it never ends in the way how most people expect. This is now potentially the silence before the storm, they say. Crypto is completely dead. Crypto is a ghost town. Nobody is interested in it. Prices are very low, and everybody says it's time to buy when prices are low. It's all about buying low when nobody pays attention, selling high when everybody talks about crypto. So this should be the optimal time to buy, shouldn't it? Now, if you're honest about this, crypto has always been a ghost town. Crypto wasn't really of interest for the common man for the vast majority of crypto's existence. There were only 2 periods where this was different. The first one was the ICO bubble. So that was in 2017, 2018. The other's dominance went from 2% to 12%. So in other words, the small altcoins, they on average outperformed by 6x. So that was the first phase where everybody got excited, where everybody went into the altcoins, the ICO bubble. The second altcoin rally happened in the first half of 2021. So this is where others' dominance went from 6% to 18%. Still a 3x outperformance. Still, the average altcoin performed 200% better than Bitcoin. But of course, there's already, even in the outperformance of the small altcoins, some kind of diminishing return over time. The altcoins don't outperform that much anymore as they used to. Now, what do those two phases have in common? The first commonality is that prior to the massive altcoin season, we saw already Bitcoin rallying quite a bit. So we had the collapse of Mt. Gox and of Silk Road. Bitcoin fell from above $1,000 down to $150, but then it went from $150 to $1,200 at the beginning of 2017. And a lot of people thought that maybe at that point, the outperformance isn't that great anymore for Bitcoin. Maybe Bitcoin isn't really worth it anymore. I want to find the next Bitcoin. And many people advertised their crypto project as the next Bitcoin, right? There was Bitcoin Diamond, there was Bitcoin Gold, there was Litecoin, and of course there was also the birth of Ethereum that then enabled people with not that much effort to launch their own crypto token. Before, you had to launch an entirely new blockchain. Now you could simply just ride on the back of Ethereum. So we had a massive bull run in Bitcoin, and we had new technology that created a lot of excitement, that created a capital rotation. The people that made money in Bitcoin rotated over to something more risky. The people that did not make any money in Bitcoin, they didn't want to touch it necessarily anymore because Bitcoin was already above $1,000, and there were many projects that were just a few cents, maybe a few single-digit dollars, and they were hoping, of course, for that to also make another 1000x. And sometimes this actually did happen. The first half of 2021, where the altcoins outperformed by 3x, was slightly different because at that point the market had already matured quite a bit. Many people got burned with prior ICOs, many people lost their money, and it was quite common knowledge that Bitcoin tends to outperform most altcoins already at that time. However, we did have a crisis in 2020, right? We had the COVID crash. Bitcoin fell down to $5,000. It came from 10,000 down to 5,000 in a matter of just a few days. And some people have been able to pick up Bitcoin at those low prices. And Bitcoin rallied, went all the way up to $40,000 roughly. And that's when again the altcoin season hit. So Bitcoin ran further, right? It went in the end to 68,000, but really at 40,000, the altcoin season started. This is when the others' dominance went up. This is when the altcoins outperformed. So it seems like we need to get something like a 7 to 8x from the bear market bottom to prices post-recovery to spur enough attention to then create a new altcoin season, to then have a lot of new retail investors enter the space anymore. So it seems like we need a 7 or 8x from the bear market bottom to post-recovery prices to create enough attention, to get enough people excited about Bitcoin or crypto in general to come into the space again. And that's what happened in 2017. That's also what happened in 2021. Now, what's interesting about the 2017 rally is there was really just new people coming in. So the number of subscribers for crypto channels went ballistic. We also saw how the number of new addresses on chain went up. There was a lot of real adoption. In 2021, that was slightly different. In 2021, I believe the altcoin season was mainly just capital rotation. So why did Bitcoin pick up in the first place? I think it was the COVID stimulus. So a lot of extra money to potentially be spent or to be gambled with, to be invested. That's also when we had the GameStop mania, and some people just bought Bitcoin with their stimulus check during the COVID crash. When Bitcoin recovered and people made some profit, then simply a capital rotation happened into the altcoins. So many people signed up for the centralized exchanges during the COVID lockdown. Many people learned about finance for the first time during COVID lockdown. And then when many people make money with Bitcoin, when many people had their accounts on the centralized exchanges, it wasn't that big of a step anymore to just buy the altcoins with those profit, at least partially. And so it was simply just a rotation, right? We moved from Bitcoin capital to the altcoins. There was not as much new people entering the space at that point. The market was already matured enough. And the reason why I say this is because the on-chain metrics didn't go up as much. The number of newly created addresses didn't go up as much. The number of transactions didn't go up as much. The number of new YouTube subscribers across the various channels also grew, but not as much as in 2017. And we can also see this by the outperformance, right? The altcoins outperformed Bitcoin by only 3x, not anymore by 6x. Now, what does this tell us about the future and about the development we have seen in the last years, right? Post-COVID, we got the approval of various ETFs, mainly, of course, the Bitcoin and the Ethereum ETF. This is where most capital went. And in theory, this is all just positive, as in it tends to push up crypto prices. There's a lot of correlation in crypto, right? When Bitcoin goes up, then many altcoins go up as well, vice versa. When Bitcoin goes down, many altcoins go down. So in general, if you have more purchases of Bitcoin, this should be great for the entire market. However, even though I do think that those ETFs are great for Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think they have been terrible for the altcoins. They haven't only been terrible for the altcoins because a lot of capital now flows into those major assets because the on-ramps are so easy. The main issue is that the reason for the 2021 rally was this rotation. The rotation of capital, of Bitcoin profits to the altcoins was extremely easy in 2021. But now when we see the current rally mainly being supported by the treasury companies and by the ETFs, so by institutional Wall Street money, it's very unlikely that that money will flow over to the altcoins, right? They're only going to be those on-ramps via the ETFs. And Dogecoin is unlikely going to get an ETF. So in a way, traditional finance and the BlackRock is taking away business from the centralized exchanges, from the Coinbases, from the Binances, from the OKXs of this world. And when they're taking away business from the centralized exchanges, they're also taking away business from the altcoins, because the centralized exchanges, they also invest in the altcoins, right? They want to push up altcoin prices. They do marketing for the altcoins. The centralized exchanges have less reach, and the altcoins as extension also have less reach. So really we have to ask ourselves, what's the reason nowadays even to be with a centralized exchange? Right? Bitcoin is known to be the best performer over the long term. Very, very few altcoins are able to outperform Bitcoin long term, especially a diversified portfolio of altcoins is very unlikely going to outperform Bitcoin. So why even sign up for the centralized exchanges for the altcoins? It doesn't make much sense. On top of that, we've got the risk of third-party custody, right? Those centralized exchanges, they can go bust, either because of fraud, right, FTX, or simply because of bad management. Maybe the security wasn't properly set up, maybe the centralized exchange got hacked, maybe the centralized exchange is not profitable anymore. Whatever the reason, right, there is another additional risk by having third-party custody over self-custody. So why use the centralized exchanges? If your answer was in order to use the leverage, in order to use the perpetual futures, that answer probably is also not that valid anymore, given that pretty much everybody got wiped out on October 10th last year, right, where we had this massive mispricing event where many altcoins within a few hours dropped by 80%, but then afterwards suddenly recover mainly again. So there is no good use case for the centralized exchanges anymore. And thus, if there's less signups for the Binances of this world, that also means less demand for the altcoins. Now, this all sounds very gloomy, as in there is no hope for crypto at all. There's no hope to generate proper returns. Now, what has to happen potentially that crypto isn't a ghost town anymore? That maybe at some point we see a third phase, right? That we see something again like 2017 or 2021. What needs to happen for the retail investor to come back in? What needs to happen for the market as a whole to expand again? The answer, I believe, is unfortunately a very strong bear market. A bear market that pushes prices so low that at some point it's reasonable again to assume that Bitcoin can very quickly make a multiple X return again. If we don't just have a bear market in the altcoins, but we also have a bear market in Bitcoin, this can potentially fuel some investors to buy for the long term again. How could that bear market be triggered? Maybe the valuations of AI companies come down, bring down the tech valuations, bring down crypto as an extension. Maybe we see a stimulus check. Maybe enough people get unemployed because of AI. AI is so successful that the unemployment rate is rising. Every developer gets laid off. Everybody that does any kind of knowledge work gets laid off. Suddenly the government has to pay for all of those unemployed people. Suddenly people have money again to speculate with, and we've got excess liquidity that then might potentially get into crypto. There are two great things that happen with a bear market. The first one is we tend to see long-term holders buy into lower prices. When you look at the number of addresses that hold at least one Bitcoin, you look at that chart over time. You can simply search for that. When you look at when does this actually grow, the answer is not necessarily during a bull market. During a bull market, the long-term holders tend to sell. It goes up during a bear market. So when FTX collapsed, when Three Arrows Capital collapsed, when we saw the Terra Luna collapse, when Bitcoin moved from 68K down to 15K, that's when the number of wallets with at least one Bitcoin went up very, very quickly. This is where we saw adoption. This is where we saw people suddenly investing into crypto again. The market became smart. The market now starts to buy when prices are low enough. The market doesn't buy anymore into rallies, especially if the rallies aren't that quick. So if we do see a proper bear market, that would be great to fuel some more adoption. Secondly, of course, if prices are low again, we might have a better chance of creating enough momentum to get enough excitement for the retail investor again. Nobody will be excited about crypto outside the people that are already in the space. Nobody outside of crypto will be interested in Bitcoin if Bitcoin was to hit, say, 150 or maybe even 200K in this year. Right? Okay, Bitcoin grows a little bit, Bitcoin doubled, but nobody would get super excited. We have hit new all-time highs in 2025. Nobody got interested in crypto. Nobody really wanted to buy crypto. So a slow rally is not enough to spur interest. What we need is a very quick appreciation. A quick appreciation happens as a consequence after we have been depressed massively. If Bitcoin was to hit 200K this year, nobody would care. But imagine Bitcoin was to fall from here. Imagine we'd see a real bear market. We would fall again to the long-term holder average cost basis, the long-term holder realized price. So even the average long-term holder would be in losses. Currently, that cost basis is at roughly $40,000. During prior cycles, we even fell 25% below the long-term holder cost basis. If we did that again, we would fall down to $30,000. Now imagine we had a bear market down to $30,000. And imagine from that bottom, we were then to rally to 200K. So we would then do our close to 7x return. That's the ideal scenario. That's the ideal point in time when altcoin season would happen. That's when the retail investor comes back. When Bitcoin moves from 30K to 200K in the span of 1 or 1.5 years, a very quick appreciation, that's when everybody is asking again, should I buy Bitcoin? That's when the news talk about it. That's when people subscribe to YouTube content again, etc. That's when we might potentially also want to sell our Bitcoin again and then get into the altcoins. But it has always historically been the 5, 6, 7x returns in Bitcoins first that needed to happen for then the altcoin season to follow, where then people rotate from Bitcoin gains to altcoin gains. Maybe the rotation won't be as intensive anymore in the future because, again, now we've got a lot of purchases through the ETFs, and ETF money is very unlikely going to rotate as quickly into the altcoins. But at least partially, we will see some kind of excitement again. At least partially, there is a chance for the smaller assets to do better than Bitcoin at that point in time. So it's unfortunate, right? On the one hand, we just want our portfolio to grow over time relatively steadily, but unfortunately, that's not exciting enough to spur quick growth. To get quick growth, we need a lot of volatility. And if volatility comes down over time, both to the upside and to the downside, there isn't that much excitement, right? There's rather apathy. There's not a lot of new people entering. We need to probably see the crash because we're not going to see a 5, 6, 7x return in Bitcoin within 1 or 2 years when we are currently close to 100K, right? We're not going to see 500,000 in Bitcoin anytime soon. The market caps are simply too large. If we do see a proper crash though, right, very similar to what we have with Mt. Gox and Silk Road, if maybe something systemic suddenly collapses, maybe Binance goes bust. Oh, I don't know if Binance will go bust, but if something systemic happens that panics everybody, then maybe that's the potential start of a healthy growth phase again. Currently, the Bitcoin price is slowly going up, right, from the 16K to our current levels, but it's not going up fast enough, and that's the big problem. If AI stocks in a year grow by 50%, if silver in a year grows by even more than that, and if Bitcoin grows by less than that, then the growth of Bitcoin isn't really exciting. What really excites is to have more growth in any other asset class. And I believe that can only happen if we are really at dirt cheap prices. And nobody wants to live through a bear market, but it might be the necessary painful medicine that we have to swallow. We simply just have to protect ourselves properly. If it's the first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish videos regularly. Feel free to also check out the premium membership. This is where I share how I personally set up my portfolio. There's also a 1-week money back guarantee. So if you do not like premium, just message me within the first week and I'll refund you, no questions asked. Thanks for watching and see you next time on YouTube or see you on premium. Cheers.